Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Fully Human Psychology podcast with Dr. Chris and Dr. Sophie, where we explore the question, what does it mean to be fully and experientially human? We have a very special guest today. And I should say before we get started that the views we express on this podcast are our own, and we do not represent any particular organization.
And I am Dr. Sophie Archibald. In today's episode, we have the privilege to talk to Dr. Kirk Schneider. He is a leading spokesperson for existential-humanistic and existential-integrative psychology. He's an adjunct faculty member at Saybrook University and formerly Teachers College, Columbia University, and a co-founder and current president of the award-winning Existential-Humanistic Institute. He's the founder of the Core of Depth Healers. He has co-authored and authored 15 books, including The Polarized Mind, The Depolarizing of America, and the latest book, Life Enhancing Anxiety, Key to a Sane World. Kirk was also a 2022 candidate for president-elect of the American Psychological Association. He's a fellow in 7 divisions of the APA, the recipient of Rollo May Award from Division 32 of the APA for outstanding and independent pursuit of new frontiers in humanistic psychology. Dr. Schneider's current focus draws on the psychology of Otto Rank. He's also involved in workshops as facilitator of the Experiential Democracy Dialogue. It is a one-on-one conflict mediation approach for people struggling with contrasting views and backgrounds. Dr. Schneider is an honorary member of the Society for Existential Analysis and the East European Association for Existential Psychology. He's a member of the Honorary Advisory Board of the APA Division 32 Journal, The Humanistic Psychologist. Dr. Schneider's work has been featured in such outlets as The New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, USA Today, Forbes Health, The Hill, Yahoo Life, and BBC World News. He has also been an invited speaker internationally at such venues as all 4 congresses of existential therapy, workshops, and conferences. If you want to follow his work, I invite you to go to his website, kirkjschneider.com, as well as his YouTube channel, Core of Depth Healers. Dr. Schneider co-hosts a podcast with Tyler Gamlin called Depth Dialogues. It features leaders in depth psychology who apply their skills to social healing. To subscribe to their website, to their podcast, please go to YouTube and Spotify. So welcome, Kirk, and thank you for exploring with us here today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Soph and Chris. I look forward to the tour with you.
Yes, we're so glad you're here. And well, to get us started, I do want to say that, Kirk, you meant a lot to us, and you mean a lot to us as a teacher, mentor, writer, and as a person that we see as really valuing this idea of full humanness and presence. And also we really admire how the diligence with which you're trying to bring certain ideas and ways of being and practices out of the therapy room, out of certain circles, into addressing social issues. And so we wanted to say that aloud here on air, that how much we appreciate you. And so we want to ask all of our guests certain core questions and then kind of go from there. And so I'd like to start us off with, can you explore this idea, what does it mean to be and become fully human? what tends to get in the way, particularly these days? How do we move with what maybe is getting in the way? To maybe if you could start us off. Yeah.
Sure.
Hmm.
Simple question, Chris.
Yeah.
I love the way you guys open the program.
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly a problem I've wrestled with for a long time.
Hmm.
I feel like, first of all, it's very much an incomplete project. What does it
Hmm.
mean to be fully experientially human?
Hmm.
And I would add, and what does that imply for the vital or fulfilled life? A sort of
Hmm.
ethical component as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, what does it mean to be fully human? Seems to me to be continually evolving, and in particular in our time, where so much of the machine model for living, if you will, is encroaching upon us through
Hmm.
our incredible technology, which is wonderful in a lot of ways, and in other ways is very worrisome. But the definition of what it means to be human is very much being challenged right
Hmm.
now with replaceable parts, mechanical parts that are replacing human parts in medicine,
Hmm.
and the encroachment of technology into the mind as well, the mind and the heart, so to speak. With therapy bots and um, certainly the increasing uh, increasing development of drugs of all kinds. Um, but I guess, to bring this down to what I see as the core of this question, um, I like to focus more on what seems essentially human, what seems to be a a part of us that would be extremely costly to lose.
Hmm.
What is the price of radically changing our definition of the human being, let's say, to become more like machines, which has been a lot of my focus and concern, what I call roboticism, which is not only the increasing emulation of the machine model for living, or the efficiency model for living, quote unquote, but the actual desire to become machines,
Hmm.
which we see in some of the transhumanist movements led by people like Ray Kurzweil,
Hmm.
who believe that we should basically become comprised of mechanical parts through genetic engineering, robotics, uh, and nanotechnology. Uh, but what is the price? And in a way, by looking at the price of the changing definition of being human, we're clarifying more, in my view, of what it means to be more fully human.
Hmm.
And my my growing sense is that the biggest price is what might be called uh, the capacity to be deeply moved.
Hmm.
And I see the sense of awe, as I define it, the humility and wonder, or sense of adventure toward living, is very integral to that.
Hmm.
That capacity to be deeply moved, to be awestruck in our relations with ourselves and with the world, with others. Uh, one of the phrases that has really struck me of late, I've been reading Jacob Needleman, thanks to your recommendations also. Uh, I know he was a mentor of yours, Chris, in particular. But I've really appreciated some of his reflections about this question of whether there is a kind of a sacred realm. Others might call it a spiritual realm behind the personas, behind the masks that we tend to wear every day. And of course, the more we get caught up in the mechanistic and the digitalized, in some sense, we're maximizing these masks because it's drawing us more toward the external world, which we're very good at. That's one of the challenges of this question about what it means to be fully human. You know, does it mean a preoccupation with the material life, with image and appearance, with speed, instant results? Or does it include that? I certainly wouldn't eliminate that. It seems to be part of our evolving nature. But does it include the deeper layers of the inner life, which I believe are increasingly neglected because of a seduction and increasing preoccupation with the material and the external and the masks, you know, the personas. So I believe Needleman is referring to some degree to his work with Gurdjieff, which I find intriguing. I don't embrace all of it. Certainly don't, you know, swallow it wholesale, but I find some profound resonances in his way of thinking with the existential humanistic emphases, which, as you know, I'm drawing from to a great extent, that philosophical base. And at one point in his work in What is God, about his personal and professional search for God, whatever that means, he refers to a quote from Emerson, the great transcendentalist, where Emerson speaks of the importance of this notion he characterizes as Jove, and that's Jove, Jove nodding to Jove in each of us, unquote. That really brought a whole wealth of reflections for me about what seems essentially human, what seems importantly human, that I don't think and I don't feel can be touched by the computerized and mechanical world. Jove nodding to Jove in each of us. And I did some research on that phrase, and also Jove. Jove, at least in British circles, was referring to the god Jupiter, the Roman god, you know, which is something like Zeus. And they use it in expressions like "by Jove," you know, how did that happen? But at a deeper level, at a more poetic level, Jove is associated with the ultimate, if you will, with ultimate concern, to use Tillich's phrase, with that which is beyond us and that we participate in, but is beyond. Some could call it God. I would prefer to call it awesome or awe-based. But the point, I guess, the way I would boil it down is that sacred realm that we touch on when we are deeply moved by something or somebody. And I think it happens in therapy, you know, on wonderful occasions. First, we try to cultivate it so that it can happen, you know, more and more frequently in our lives and in therapy. But if you think of it, I think for those of you who are therapists out there, think of examples of when you've really touched on something, a chord. Music is a good metaphor too, I find.
Mm-hmm.
A chord that strikes you in your connection with someone, uh, where you're both deeply moved, or you're struck suddenly. Ah, yeah, this is this is something really important to you. This is something that deeply matters. And I feel that in myself. So I resonate to that in myself, that part that deeply matters.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that's often about a specific thing or a person or a project. But even more than that, it's about something to do with our relationship to existence, to the cosmic. It's got a transcendent element to it, and an element of mystery, I believe, profound mystery that is so essentially human, in my view, and that perhaps defines us in a core way. I'm not saying it is the core with a capital C or the answer, but it's certainly a part of us that I would say people, very thoughtful people and great artists, writers, scientists, uh, seekers, people who are seeking to explore the more of who we are, greater meaning and sense of connection with life, come around to, converge on. And it's hard to talk about, it's hard to articulate, but we feel it. Most importantly, we certainly feel it. I feel it when I hear Mahler's Fifth or Beethoven Symphony, or Led Zeppelin at the top of his their game. Joan Baez, singing Diamonds and Rust. That comes to mind recently. It it's in a way it's important that it's not easy to articulate, because if it was easy to articulate, that means that we're wrapping words and categories around something that can't be wrapped. Of necessity, it's a radically open and evolving sensibility. And so, yes, this is why we focus so much on the experiential in depth and existential humanistic therapy. The experiential being pre-verbal and embodied, as much or more than on the content of what's exchanged. So I would say to aspire to full humanness, one needs to make that connection. One needs to allow for or have that well, or that fount within oneself that's relatively accessible to oneself in day-to-day life as much as possible. And it is a lifetime cultivation, in my view. Peak experiences are great, and shots of awe, as it's been put, or doses of awe, walking, through a beautiful forest or see a sunset, all great. But I believe that this core sensibility is optimized over a lifetime. It's like cooking a great soup. It takes steeping, or a stew. That's why I like the difference between the quick boil sense of awe and the slow simmer. the same of bringing out the flavors, bringing out the depth, the taste, uh, the symphony, in a sense, the fuller symphony. So I don't know if that answers your question,
Mm.
but
Sure.
we're certainly as fully, the notion of full humanist encompasses a very wide range. I'm talking about a part of our humanness, and I do believe that it's cross-cultural,
Mm.
to the limitation of my own knowledge and experience of that. I have felt that kind of bridging across many cultures, subcultures. It's so human. It has so much to do with, again, our primal relationship to existence right from the beginning, that it seems to me we're all exposed to, but too often gets quickly covered over, especially in Western industrialized societies, by rules and regulations. And maybe basically a kind of fear of that interior life that has brought about great things, especially in standard of living and in the external world, but has neglected these very core sensibilities.
I'd like to reflect on something that feels very palpable for me, uh, listening to um, your your experience, and I wonder how many of our listeners will have come to that contact too. When you're describing things, Kirk, what is obvious to me is that as you think through and you describe for us this inner world, this outer world, and I, I can feel that as you articulate things for us, you're also coming into deep, intimate contact with this phenomenon that you're describing. So it seems to me that not only are you describing and using words for all of us to listen, but you're also feeling into internally what these things, the life that they have in you. And um, that is very obvious to me that as you describe the words and you verbalize and articulating things, you are in full contact with them as it is unfolding in you right now. And I find that to be part of this inner life that you are describing, that there that you are actually in deep relationship with as you're describing.
Thank you for that. I wouldn't. I guess I'm shy of saying full
Mhm.
in an absolute sense, but certainly growing relationship with that inner life, deep relationship. I do feel that with that inner life.
Yeah, and a genuine, authentic. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I feel very blessed to have had people in my life and experiences that have helped to bring that out in me, given me permission to feel those connections. Because there were times in my life where those were cut off to a great extent. And so maybe I feel them all the more acutely because of that as well. Just so appreciative of a kind of inner freedom that I feel is so much about being more fully human, if you will.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want to set myself up as, saint-like or a panacea here. It's an everyday encounter and grappling, in a sense, with that wholeness and love of life.
Yeah.
Love is very much part of it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm.
Even right now, I'm doing my best to connect with you both in those ways and appreciating your journeys into that realm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I appreciate about you is I feel like you've are someone that's helped give me some permission to make that contact
Mm.
too. And yeah. I'm struck by several items you shared in your initial response. And something that comes up for me is that I'd like to put out there is when we think about the times we're living in, and I've heard people talking about the attention economy or the pulls of attention, and I'm thinking about in presence and presence in EH therapy and in general. And if I could, I'd like to read an excerpt from one of your books that both Sophie and I really love. Your book, The Spirituality of Awe, um,
Okay.
challenges to the robotic revolution.
Yeah.
Um, there's so much we could read from there, but on page 71, you say, too often machines are wresting us from the one trump card we humans hold, uh, the beauty and agony of being alive,
Mm.
right? Um, and I'm thinking about the role that attention and presence plays in terms of even making contact with
Mm.
the beauty and agony of being alive. I'm thinking of the pulls on our attention away from maybe the agony and yet also the beauty. Um, and I'm thinking about at some point in your initial response, you mentioned how things are kind of the machine model is actually getting into our hearts in
Mm.
some way.
Mm.
And I guess if I could formulate that into a question, I'd ask, what role do you think attention and presence has in helping us with full humanness, and in particular in these times where there's kind of the attention economy and there's all these pulls and none of us are saying technology is bad, and but what we're saying is we're talking about full humanness. And I certainly work with clients in therapy that would identify themselves as having major technology addictions in one form or another, whether it's to using their devices, everything from work email and working on their phone to pornography to um, gambling. Um, and then you have the spectrum of folks that maybe don't feel fully addicted, but they feel like somehow they're being entertained, but also held back from their full potential at the same time.
Mm.
So I guess,
Well, I think so many of these things are fear-based,
yeah. Mm,
precisely because we don't learn to be with that agony and ecstasy
mm,
from early ages. Often it's not really prized in our culture and in caretaking that I've observed, generally speaking.
mm,
It's certainly not in socioeconomic model that we live under, you know,
Mm.
speed and instant results, and
Mm.
appearance and packaging. So there's a great seduction in finding quick fixes,
Mhm.
whether that's, you know, the zing we get from some kind of attention, or what they used to say, 15 minutes of fame, right?
Mhm.
We certainly see it in a number of our political leaders today.
Mm.
You know, seeming almost addicted to that kind of attention.
Mhm.
And I would say it's mixed. It's probably to a great extent fear driven, because people don't feel okay within their own skins
Mm.
and being more authentic, and so don't need to, you know, don't crave that as much. But it also, ironically, may be a sort of twisted way of trying to gain something that was never fully cultivated, and that is greater presence,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Attention is related to presence. It's just that it's so often at a superficial level,
Mm.
uh, having to do with quick hits, like the dopamine hits or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but I do imagine that there are many people who crave fuller attention from earlier times in their lives.
Mm. Mhm.
But as a society, the way we're structured, we don't take too well to living the paradoxes of life. And that's what I was bringing out in that passage, too,
Mm.
the agony and the beauty,
Mhm.
the agony and the beauty. And this goes back to what I was saying before about capacity to be deeply moved, or a sense of awe. These are paradoxical sensibilities.
Mm.
And we're not too good at really supporting the paradoxes that we are.
Mm.
But ironically, the less we do that, I think in some ways the less human we become. Because
Mm.
again, that's so defining of us, to recognize our great fragility and vulnerability as mortal coils before the vastness of this mystery that we're all literally suspended in. We forget that. We are
Mm.
literally floating, suspended, and we're whirling
Mm.
through cosmic unknowns. And we came out of cosmic unknowns, and we're heading to cosmic unknowns.
Yeah.
And so it is literally and figuratively, we're in a spaceship together. And some of us have a vested interest in not recognizing that, especially often more authoritarian leaning powers have a special interest in not recognizing that, not exposing that to the people.
Mm.
Because if they expose that, they'd expose their own vulnerability as well. They'd expose the ambiguity of life as distinct from certitude, you know, absolutism, however that manifests.
Mm.
But what they're overlooking is the great vitality in being able to feel and see that we're both food for worms and soaring angels. You know, that we're
Mm.
very impressionable, sad, anxious, fearful, angry, perhaps, uh, envious, the range of emotion. We're all of that, and we also have a great capacity to venture out, to take risks, to inquire, to be curious, and to feel our participation in something much greater than ourselves. And the combination of the two, Rollo May called it fructifying. I like that word, fructifying of the paradoxes of our lives. I would say it's vitalizing. It's giving us a fuller sense of life. I like that that food analogy. It's the whole enchilada. Instead of taking little pieces out of it, it's eating the full meal. And the full meal comes with pain, comes with some trembling, fear, naturally, and a sense of isolation and abandon, because we are, from the moment we're ejected from the cosmos and from our mothers, there is some form of abandonment there. And there's no set of instructions. I mean, there's a lot of illusions of the sets of instructions, but I think existentially there really is none. We have to make our own way through that. But that's
something I'd like to follow up. I'd like to follow up on something you said as and see what Sophie thinks about this. When we were talking about attention, you helped me realize something. So when we think of the attention economy, like at least one way I think of that is someone wanting to get attention or to be noticed, and then also wanting to take other people's attention, wanting to. So there's pulls on our attention, meaning the phone or the social media or the texting or the emailing or the devices, and our attention is being pulled towards that, and then also we're seeking that attention, right? So and I'm thinking about you got me thinking about maybe that's kind of a more mechanical, unconscious way of seeking presence. I'm present, I exist if someone's paying attention to me, or also I can avoid this present moment of my actual life by going into this technological realm or this mechanical realm. I can avoid the more poignant beauty. And I know we're not saying that that's always a bad thing, but we're saying part of what I'm noticing is that it can be obviously obsessive and excessive. And one of the things that I appreciate about whenever I've seen you online in any sort of content or speaking, and when I see the podcast that you and Tyler Gamlin do, the Depth Dialogues podcast, so that's that's in a form of media. So I'm giving my attention to that, and I'm paying attention to the two of you. So uh, and yet the effect that your work online and both of your work in that podcast has on me is very different from other forms of media I've consumed that can tend to be a little more addictive. And it kind of leads into a question that I have for you in terms of with that podcast, the depth dialogues that you and Tyler are creating. What is the effect, both experientially and otherwise, that you're hoping that that podcast has on a viewer?
Well, I hope it brings a sense of substantive presence.
Hmm.
Sure, you could be attracted to the shiny objects that are all out there in the media and many podcasts, perhaps the most popular ones. But we're trying to bring something that again touches on that sacred realm I was talking about, Jove nodding to Jove in each of us.
Mm-hmm.
Sacred realm touching on sacred realm in each of us,
Mm.
to the degree we can within those settings, and really trying to highlight people who are bringing substantive presence to their work and to other people,
Mm.
to the world,
Mm.
as models for others to look into, like windows,
Mm.
um, and hopefully be inspired by. Because one of our main credos, if you will, for the core of depth healers uh, is really people who have background in healing communication and who are very concerned about emotionally impoverished relationships in the country. So what we're trying to highlight is what we call emotionally restorative relationships. And that's relationships where people feel seen and heard and that get at the roots of their problems. And
Mm.
that kind of contact can happen in a wide range of healing settings. You know, everything from in-depth, longer-term psychotherapy to mentoring, to life coaching, to work with prisoners, to nursing, clergy, even, and certainly in schools, educators, bringing that kind of contact, that kind of engagement
Mm.
in their relationships, in the work setting as well. So it's a very ambitious, wide-ranging
Mm.
project to try to inject more of that focus on our deeper inner lives
Mm.
and to highlight how healing, how beneficial that can be to bring to a variety of settings,
Mm.
and how critical it is in our times where the symptoms of the lack of that are all over the place. In my view, it's
Mm.
showing up in the destructive divisiveness, political, cultural divisiveness, hatred, of the other,
Mm.
um, the way we treat our earth and climate, uh, the way we engage in prejudice, racism, and the skyrocketing rates of psychological disturbance, depression, anxiety, isolation.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah, they're
I, w-
symptoms.
I wanted to reflect on this a few points that you made and you and Tyler in your podcast in the dialogue you bring in um, leaders who
Mm,
work in this field, uh, but who apply their skills specifically uh, for the community, for um, social healing.
yeah.
And I think back at what you're describing in your first exploration about a question being fully human, becoming fully human, that there is um, maybe we are more, we tend to be more focused on the outside world, our external world, and not as much our internal world that seems to me just as complex and diverse as the cosmos. Here we are, we have this inner world that's just as rich and mysterious. And by maybe this disconnection of this inner world and not being as in tune with what's happening inside, that has the consequence of in how we participate into our external world, and vice versa. And this disconnection from the internal paradox and this disconnection from awe, and you talk in your book too, that Chris was talking about this, that awe is part of being in contact with multiple things at once that feel paradoxical, and this openness to contact with this inner world has a consequence into how we participate in our communities. And so it feels like we're coming a little bit full circle into that there is a real concrete consequence to maybe even in our relationship disconnection, being disconnected from our loved ones, when we are so disconnected with our inner mystery, and the complexity of that, the pain and the joy of that. So I see these connections between how we interact with our internal world and how we then participate in our external world, and how those two things means in some way being in our full humanness.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're never provided the skills to work with that paradoxical nature, which again, I do resonate with Rank's idea that this begins right at the beginning when we're ejected from the womb. Think about that. The two basic experiences that seem to be core to that moment of birth are shock and overwhelm, but quickly on the heels of that, a growing curiosity and wonder about what is this radically unknown place with all these lights and hands and flesh contacts and you know, greenery, if you can see that at some point soon. But these seem to be the sort of raw diamonds that constitute our humanity. And if we can be given the tools through supportive and present relationships early on, then we're more able to be present to this really rich, granted difficult and uncomfortable and messy at times, world and experience that can form the template for being able to be in and be with those ranges as we grow, as we get older, and bring them to our, you know, our love relationships, our work relationships, hopefully eventually our cultural and political relationships. But no, what too often happens is that we're really scared of being in those paradoxes. So we close them off quickly, cover them over, and become very one-sided. And it's the beginning of, I would say, the primal beginnings of prejudice and bigotry. And over-identification with some dehumanizing stance, either toward oneself or toward others. And an inability to see the more and to feel the more of who we are, and to have the options of coming into the more of who we are. We just get reduced. So these are primal, really primal issues. That's part of why they're so important to address, and they're so difficult to address. We try to address them too often, I think, even in psychology, on the surface level. We're rearranging thoughts, we're rearranging physiology. Okay, but you're not getting to the core agency and sense of being, or I am, that forms very primordially from the start. And so if you're not really getting to that sacred realm again, I do think you're often rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You're going to continue to try to make things look pretty on the outside and run smoothly, but inside it's seething, or it's dissipating, disintegrating. And we see the symptoms of that in both individuals and the collective world these days.
One of the things I really love about your writing, Kirk, is the way you describe things. And you give in the same book that Chris was mentioning earlier, a definition of on page 16, where you say that awe is formally defined as a commingling of dread, veneration, and wonder. It is a cohabitation of profound humility and a sense of smallness juxtaposed to equally profound fascination and curiosity in life. The awe conveys humanity's sense of apartness from and participation in the grandeur of creation. And but the reason why I love how you write things is because you describe clearly the complexity of this this business of being alive. And sometimes we want to explain and simplify so much that we take life out of life, and that it is okay that it is complex. It is okay that these ideas are living or better explained in silence, and we do not know how to explain them. And in a sense, we are closer to those things of sacredness that you're describing when we're losing words, and and yet it is those relationships and the connections we have with each other that when we are able to hear and feel how someone is experiencing something and describing this complex human phenomena, that we then understand that it is supposed to be difficult to explain. It is supposed to be putting ideas side by side that are that seem like they are the the complexity is not a sense, it's not a problem, but it's part of the process. And there's something about that that I'm really grateful in how you describe these things that are that profound and that complex, because it clarifies that there's nothing wrong with complexity and with paradox. There's something very right with it.
Well, if you gathered that from my writings, I'm deeply appreciative, because that's a lot of what I'm trying to impart. In essence, I'm trying to describe the indescribable. But as a psychologist, and beyond just being a psychologist, not going to just wear that cloak, because I feel so connected with, I guess, the inquirer's path. I am attempting to translate these very difficult ideas that are much better portrayed in great art, music, writing, but attempting to convey them so that I guess more everyday people can, yeah, like you were saying, have some greater understanding of what's going on here, some mooring points to to validate their own struggles, even if they're momentary, when they break out of the surface shell, as William James puts it, and have a crisis or whatever. That it speaks to them. I think I really appreciate that, and I continue to try to refine that ability to translate these difficult ideas to more concrete ways of understanding. I think there's a real important role to that, as well as the great art and metaphor. Metaphor is extremely powerful. Poetry that evokes it. But both are important if we're going to be fully human, more fully human.
When I think of the voice kind of in your writings, there's a caring in the subject matter itself, because the subject matter of your books is always kind of seeking to help or seeking to create a holding environment and an illuminating environment, that comes through in the writing. So there's this care, and yet there's also a not sugarcoating some of the agonies that we face as humans, and then the challenges of our time. So there's very much, and I'm thinking as we're talking here today, about something I appreciate about kind of the trainings that you're involved in and at the Existential-Humanistic Institute, and these. And when I think of depth and experiential therapy in general and the therapeutic relationship, is that these therapist guides we might have, if they're willing to be in this depth and in this presence, it can help us feel more supported in going into our inner world and making some contact with the agonies and the joy in that with that relationship there, with that guide there that's not trying to help us escape it, but also we're not alone in it. We're not just spiraling downward. And yeah, there's something about the way you are, like here today, and the way you and Tyler are on the depth dialogues. When I watch you guys on the podcast, what I notice is I'm in myself too. I'm coming back. I'm taking in what you're both discussing, and yet I'm in myself. I can sense my body. When I turn off the podcast, I don't feel addicted to just scroll to the next thing. I can go out, then I can go venture out. Whereas if, from what I've heard, I actually don't do much of it, but I have in the past. But what I hear from people with the addiction to the scrolling and the one thing after another and one stimulating thing, I mean, I know folks that spend hours doing that, and it's very different from you one question you ask in the spirituality of awe that I think is good for me to read aloud here, because it's something maybe listeners could ask themselves. But on page 49, you say, what are the various applications of high tech that you personally would find in alignment with your deeply held values, life philosophy, and spiritual yearnings? Right. So when we can ask ourselves that, like that project you both are doing with depth dialogues, it comes closer to me to deeply held values, life philosophy. And I think a lot of folks probably know that some of their applications of high tech are not aligned at all with their. And so that creates a type of, whatever we want to call it, moral injury or alienation from themselves that, yeah.
Well, my summary of what you're saying is we need to be in control of the technology, not the technology controlling us. I know you've heard that before.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really important truism, if you will, that if we can maintain human dignity, to recognize that there is something really precious and amazing about this gift of life that we've been bestowed, and that these machines are products of our own creation. I guess similar to the Frankenstein myth, we can hopefully rise above the identification with the products and recognize so much that we bring to the table beyond those products. So a roundabout way of saying, yes, I do think our products or our technologies can be facilitators of the engagement with the sacred realms to a significant degree. I'm not convinced that they are as facilitative as the raw experience. This gets into a big debate about awe and psychology, where we're trying to replicate the awe experience through virtual reality.
Right.
And certainly there are amazing things in that reality. I've been in one of those Oculus things. Yes, and it has an awesome quality. But, is witnessing a deep, dark forest and a starry night within an enclosed technology the same as being in a deep, dark forest on a starry night? That's the phenomenological question that I want to keep asking people.
Yeah.
Even though from a some neuroscientific points of view, the same kinds of activations are going on in the same centers of the brain. Well, here's a problem you guys have with phenomenology. The map may not be the territory. What you're seeing activated may be a little piece of the pie of what all that is getting activated that's very mysterious and elusive. And so, don't foreclose the sort of argument that we can replicate the awe experience in very controlled ways. Like the difference between a closed system and an open system. To me, those are as radically freeing and opening as they may be, and even creative. It's not the same as the really uncontrolled and unpredictable mysterium tremendum. That's beyond these enclosures. Those are the fuller mysteries. So I think we need to be careful. Be careful about false equivalencies in this area. Be careful about the map being the territory. And as long as we can see these techniques as something that can bring us larger sense of being, of consciousness, in those paradoxical ways I was talking about, great. I was thinking when you were talking about the computer, seeing podcasts, I was thinking of all the connections I've made through the computer to people in China, or in Japan, or in Mid-East, or in South America, where have you.
Yeah.
Those are amazing contacts. At times, there are those, feels like almost sacred moments of connection, even though you're through a thin wafer doing that. But that's where our machines are opening worlds that we wouldn't have had access to before. It would have been much more difficult.
Yeah. I do think, for me, an aspect of full humanness is using tools with conscience and with a sense of conscious love or ethics creativity, but there's certain tools out there that it does seem can use us, and can and that there is something about the pause and the choice as a human. And I know we're running low on time, but we didn't get a chance to talk necessarily about embodiment and because I also think of as a human my ego, my intellect, my um, ability to be defensive or guarded. These are also tools in a way, and am I controlled by them, or can I pause and sense my body and sense I'm beginning to get defensive, or I'm beginning to feel my ego flare up or something, and can I move with that? And so I think of as like there's the outer world within me, and there's the outer world outside, and there's and yeah, so the mm,
Yeah, I mean, there are fear-based tools and there
mm,
are presence-based tools.
mm,
And I
mm,
think that's a significant difference.
mm,
I do believe so much in presence being a, a guide for us
mm,
to help us discern, what is pseudo and, you know, not really gratifying
mm,
and what is deeply gratifying
mm,
uh, and
mm,
important for ourselves and the world. Yeah, we need more and more of that ability to pause
mm,
and to reflect, not just intellectually and not just affectively, uh, you know, not even just sensate, but with our whole body experience. I think that's the great task. And that's what people like Tillich, Martin Buber, and Kierkegaard, I think, were pointing to. Uh, Being able to immerse oneself, to give oneself time to immerse in the cosmic scope of our experience. The more our experience can be cosmic, the more it is cosmic in scope. In other words, being able to take in the good, the bad, and the ugly, the mind, body, spirit, the whole enchilada. The more we can do that, the closer that we come to some kind of deeper truth about ourselves and about the world. But it's ever evolving.
mm,
And this is where, yeah, I'm right with you about the embodiment as being a really critical aspect of it.
mm,
But we
mm,
don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater
mm,
in any area of our lives, it seems to me.
yeah. Mm,
One thought that crossed my mind hearing you, Kirk, is that it about presence and becoming and being fully human is that it's difficult to know that we are uh, fully present if we don't come across moments when we're not,
mm,
and uh, we've we come to understanding that we are in our full being because there are times when we are awakening to the fact that we're not.
Mm.
And because then there's the recognition that I was not. And so part of what we're also trying to say here together is not that there is this perfect way of being that that here we are. We are these perfect enlightened beings, but it's an ongoing process of
mm,
uh, going out of our humanness and coming into um, and awakening to our lack of presence, and maybe the stupor of horror, maybe that we have been so far off of that, and maybe cruel to the people we love, or disconnected or dismissive in all kinds of different ways. And in order to be fully present, there's a need to recognize and that we are not, and that's the only way to find our path, is getting lost a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah, and how do we recognize that we're not present
Yeah,
if we're not
got lost. Yeah.
supported to be present,
Mm-hmm.
or don't have that exposure somehow?
Mhm.
I mean, I guess Gurdjieff talks about sleepwalking through life.
Yeah.
Many of us do sleepwalk through life. And
Yeah.
there's a place for some sleepwalking, I believe,
Mm.
some zoning out, or
Yes. I
it's
know
overwhelming for a human to be intensely
yeah.
present every moment.
No. Well, and something he talks about is that we have a mechanical side to us, an automatic side. We have culturally programmed side. We need that, and there's good in it. And yet, some things have happened to where we've become excessively that, and modern industrialized society, it becomes, and from what I see, that's probably getting more and more to the point where even a relationship like a therapist, which originated originally way back, we're talking about tribe members that made some efforts to be healers or to be supportive of the tribe's psychological, emotional life, whatever, to the point where even that role is can be whatever we want to call it, made into a mechanized role. So, um, and yet I'm finding that as much as sometimes therapists might feel pressured to get with the times and do this and that, and I have some hopes for AI in terms of its potential helpfulness, but more I work with and know in my personal life and in therapy a lot of people who are yearning for a deeper presence, uh, to, as you say in one of your books, to make some intentional opting out, some breaks from technology, to be in nature, to be with their family. They want their family to put down the screens more often. They want to take in deeper, beautiful art, real deep art with their family and then talk about it, and not just have everybody, you go on vacation and everybody's on their screen the whole time. Um,
Just
so,
look
so
up from your phone. I mean, look up at
yeah,
the sky.
yeah. So there's also a big yearning for that, simultaneously. And I think that, you know, Gurdjieff talked about our mechanical side and our essence, and we need to cultivate the essence, and the mainstream and society isn't going to particularly do that in most cases. Yeah.
Well, and that's why spaces like this are so important, and spaces
Yeah.
like in-depth, longer-term therapy
Mm,
or relational engagement in a variety of areas and fields.
mm,
So
mm,
important that we preserve these sanctuaries, if you will, these sacred places that fly so much in the face of our most of our everyday lives,
mm,
quick paced and hasty lives, which
mm,
to some degree I think are panic driven at a low level.
mm,
Because the other side of that is that people will never be exposed to Jove nodding to Jove in each of us. They won't even know what that means after a certain point if it's all machine mediated, basically.
mm,
Everything, like kids are often learning today about information technologies so they can be, robotic specialists, I guess, or be specialists in working in the information age, which is necessary and functional, at a lot of levels, but again, at what price? Will they be losing that capacity to pause, to deliberate with their whole body experience, to stand in awe before the gift of life, to even see life as a gift, an opportunity, and to feel an inner freedom to range within versus being stuck
Wow.
on a treadmill kind of thing. Yeah.
I appreciate how you encourage at least me to slow down and relish some of these things. Like you just said, to even see life as a gift. That's something, if I really slow down and let it sink into the body and move around, and I think yeah, the way you are and the way you articulate and the way you write, I think encourages us to slow down with some of those things and kind of hold them, and I appreciate that. And
Oh,
yeah,
I
I know
think
that we're a little bit over time, and I really appreciate you for being here with us and exploring this. And
Can I
yeah,
say one more thing?
yes,
Okay, because on this point, I also realize that I and maybe we are coming from a privileged position on this.
yeah,
Somebody has to put bread on the table, or
yeah,
they're extremely oppressed in dehumanizing circumstances. It's
mhm,
really hard to pause and be
yeah,
more fully present.
mm,
But my point is that we need to get at the power centers and the structures
mm,
create those dehumanizing circumstances.
mhm,
Uh, Probably some kind of people's revolt in the area of humanizing,
mm,
as we were talking about, where we're not cultivating leaders, so-called leaders,
mhm,
and social structures that almost virtually exclude the possibilities for these kinds of spaces
mhm.
and the safety nets that are required to enable these kinds of spaces. So that's my last
Yes,
Thank
thought
you.
on
yes, we'll say it now. We would like to have you on again to to go further down that road to what you just shared, and with some of the work out in the social space, because I, I would love to have you on again for that too.
it. I'd enjoy that very much.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, Sophie, before we?
Besides, thank you. Thank you both for this conversation, for this exchange, for your presence, for your humanity, and for your friendship.
Thank you, Sophie,
Welcome.
and both of you.
Yes.
And poor John with the work.